After watching armies and battles change history, I found a darker question. What happens when victory comes slowly, one wall at a time? A siege is more than an attack. It is engineering, hunger, patience, geography, supplies, fear, and politics pressed against stone. This journey does not glorify suffering. It studies how fortified places became turning points for empires, revolutions, and nations. Welcome, and behold the epic scale of history. Through this corridor, the air is thick with rain. Our first stop is Tyre, where Alexander tries to defeat something more difficult than an army, the sea itself. Chapter 1 takes me to Tyre, where Alexander faces a city protected not only by walls, but by the sea itself. This siege matters because it shows conquest becoming engineering, with soldiers trying to turn water into a road. The island walls rise from the Mediterranean like a challenge, forcing the attackers to solve geography before battle can begin. Macedonian engineers drag stone, timber, and earth into the sea, building a causeway toward a city that refuses surrender. Supply here moves by ship, cart, rope, and human labor, proving that a siege is often a contest of endurance. Behind the walls, waiting becomes its own weapon, while the sea wind carries the sound of tools closer every day. From above, the siege is a tightening circle of ships, causeway, towers, and dust pushing toward the island. The turning point is not one heroic charge. It is the moment the sea barrier begins to lose its power. Even an island fortress can be reached. The Siege of Tyre, 332 BCE, a moment of extraordinary human endeavor. Tyre mattered because it opened the coast to Alexander and showed how siege warfare could reshape natural obstacles. This victory was not simply about force, because without engineering, naval pressure, and patience, the walls would still stand. What I remember from Tyre is the impossible road, slowly appearing across water like ambition made of stone. The next portal pulls me inland, toward a hill where Caesar builds not one wall, but two. Chapter 2 brings me to Alesia, where Caesar turns siege warfare into a giant machine of earth, wood, and discipline. This siege matters because Rome is not only trapping a city, it is trapping a rebellion and blocking a relief army. The hilltop settlement looks strong, but the Roman answer is even stranger, a wall facing in and another facing out. Legionaries cut timber, dig trenches, plant stakes, and convert the landscape into a weapon that cannot sleep. Every basket of grain and every guarded road matters, because hunger and time are part of Caesar's strategy. Inside this waiting world, soldiers on both sides are caught between exhaustion, loyalty, fear, and the pressure of history. From the ridge, the Roman works look like a wooden and earthen ring tightening around an entire people. The turning point comes when the relief force arrives, yet Caesar's outer wall makes rescue itself another battlefield. This is it. The siege reaches its most dangerous moment, hidden by dust and distance. The sheer scale of these Alesia mattered because it helped secure Roman control over Gaul and strengthened Caesar's road toward power. This siege did not end every struggle overnight, but it turned engineering into a political weapon of conquest. What I remember from Alesia is the double wall, because it shows fear being measured, planned, and built. The next portal opens to Jerusalem, where walls, faith, factions, and empire collide in a deeply sensitive chapter. Chapter 3 is Jerusalem in 70 CE, and this scene must be handled carefully, because history here still carries pain. This siege matters because it reshaped Roman power, Jewish history, religious memory, and the future of an ancient city. The walls are not just military defenses. They protect homes, sacred spaces, politics, hunger, and competing hopes. Roman engineers build ramps and prepare machines, showing how empire turns patience into pressure against stone. Supply becomes the invisible battlefield, because food, water, entry, and exit determine how long a city can endure. Inside the city, ordinary people wait under impossible pressure. We must show dignity rather than spectacle. The Roman camp forms a controlled ring outside the walls, while dust and distance keep the scene readable and safe. The turning point comes when the siege works reach the defenses, and the city's isolation becomes impossible to ignore. We're here at the Siege of Jerusalem, 70 CE. The intensity is palpable as the Roman legions advance through the dust and smoke. Jerusalem mattered because its fall became a turning point in Roman, Jewish, and religious history across centuries. No single camera angle can explain this tragedy, and no short video should pretend the human cost was simple. What I remember is the weight of the walls, because some stones seem to carry memory longer than empires. The next portal moves forward more than 1,000 years, toward a city where cannon challenges ancient walls. Chapter 4 surrounds me with Constantinople, where walls that stood for centuries face cannon, ships, and imperial ambition. This siege matters because the fall of the city ended Byzantine rule and announced a new Ottoman age. The Theodosian walls look almost eternal, but gunpowder is teaching the world that even ancient defenses can age. The siege of Constantinople wasn't just a clash of arms, it was a brutal test of technological endurance. Food, morale, ships, repair teams, and sea access all matter because a city under siege fights in every direction. Inside the walls, defenders patch damage by night, while outside the guns remind everyone that time is shrinking. From a safe distance, the city appears surrounded by camps, ships, smoke, and an army that refuses to leave. The turning point is the moment the wall no longer feels like a guarantee, only a damaged line under pressure. The final crisis stays hidden by smoke and stone dust, but the broken masonry tells the story clearly enough. Constantinople mattered because it changed Mediterranean power, siege warfare, trade routes, and the symbolic end of Rome's eastern world. Cannon did not win alone. Money, ships, morale, politics, and leadership all helped decide the final days. What I remember is the wall at dawn, damaged but still majestic, as if an era is saying goodbye. The next portal crosses the ocean, toward a lake city where conquest becomes alliance, disease, ships, and causeways. Chapter 5 brings me to Tenochtitlan, a lake city where siege warfare becomes water control, alliances, and catastrophe. This siege matters because it helped bring down the Mexica capital and transformed the future of the Americas. The city's defenses are causeways, canals, bridges, water, and urban density, not only walls of stone. Attackers prepare brigantines and move along causeways, while defenders use the lake city's layout to resist. Supply is everything here. Water routes, food access, allied support, disease, and broken causeways shape each day. Inside the city, ordinary life is under unbearable pressure. This scene shows scale without turning suffering into spectacle. From above, the siege looks like a struggle over lines of water, connecting and cutting the capital. The turning point appears when movement across the lake and causeways becomes harder for the defenders to control. The siege of Tenochtitlan on Lake Texcoco has reached a critical stage. Spanish brigantines and allied warriors Tenochtitlan mattered because its fall opened a new colonial order and ended one of the great cities of its world. This story cannot be told honestly without remembering indigenous allies, disease, politics, and the complexity of conquest. What I remember is the water, because the city seems both protected by it and slowly isolated through it. The next portal returns to Europe, where a great imperial capital is surrounded and a relief army races toward it. Chapter 6 takes me to Vienna in 1683, where a besieged capital waits while a relief army gathers beyond the hills. This siege matters because it became a major turning point in the long Ottoman-Habsburg struggle for Central Europe. The walls and bastions are modern for their age, but trenches and artillery are crawling closer every day. Engineers dig, guns fire, and siege lines tighten, while every shovel of earth changes the geometry of danger. Supply pressure is everywhere. Camps need food, defenders need time, and the relief force needs a path through the hills. Inside Vienna, waiting becomes a battle of nerves, because every distant sound could be attack or rescue. The outer ring of siege works makes the city feel trapped, yet the horizon still holds the possibility of movement. The turning point comes when the relief army arrives, changing the siege from slow pressure into open field decision. The siege of Vienna reached its climax in September 1683. The Ottoman trenches pressed closer, their artillery raining down upon the walls. Vienna mattered because the failed siege shifted momentum in Central Europe and became a powerful symbol for later generations. The story must be told carefully, because later memory often turns complex politics into simple slogans. What I remember is the horizon, because the fate of the city seems to arrive from beyond it. The next portal crosses the Atlantic, where a siege at Yorktown helps turn rebellion into independence. Chapter 7 opens at Yorktown, where a rebellion gains the shape of a nation through trenches, ships, and timing. This siege matters because it becomes the last major battle of the American Revolutionary War and forces a political endgame. The defenses are earthworks, redoubts, rivers, and coastal position, all waiting for artillery and ships to decide movement. American and French engineers dig closer by night, turning distance into pressure, one trench line at a time. The French fleet offshore is not background. It helps close the sea door and traps the British Army on land. Inside the siege lines, the war feels less like a painting and more like exhaustion, measured by shovels and rain. From above, Yorktown becomes a locked box. Trenches on land, ships at sea, and no easy road out. The siege lines are tightening, drawing closer with every hour. The relentless artillery has weakened the fortress walls. The crisis is shown through cannon smoke and earthworks, not close violence, because the decisive force is containment. Yorktown mattered because the surrender helped secure American independence and reshape the balance of Atlantic power. This victory belonged to coordination. American persistence, French troops, French naval power, and British strategic pressure all converged. What I remember from Yorktown is the quiet shoreline, because the sea itself helped decide a revolution. The next portal follows a river south, to a city whose fall splits a confederacy in two. Chapter 8 brings me to Vicksburg, where the Mississippi River becomes the spine of strategy in the American Civil War. This siege matters because the capture of Vicksburg divides the Confederacy and gives the Union control of the river. The city sits on high bluffs, making geography itself part of the defense and the reason the place is so valuable. Union forces build trenches, batteries, and approaches, turning the siege into a slow grind of engineering and pressure. Supply and river control decide the story, because the Mississippi is not scenery, it is a strategic artery. Inside and around Vicksburg, people endure heat, fear, shortage, and waiting, while the camera keeps the suffering respectful. The outer lines wrap the city with earthworks, artillery positions, roads, and river pressure from several directions. The realization dawns here that relief cannot break through, and the river fortress cannot hold forever. Vicksburg will fall. The Siege of Vicksburg, a critical chapter in American history, unfolds before us, a panorama of determination and resilience against the Mississippi bluffs. Vicksburg mattered because it helped split the Confederacy and elevated Grant as a commander of national importance. Still, this siege did not end the war. It showed how modern conflict could be decided by logistics as much as courage. What I remember is the river below the bluffs, silent and powerful, carrying the meaning of the campaign southward. The next portal turns brutally cold, toward a city where survival itself becomes a form of resistance. Chapter 9 takes me to Leningrad, where a siege becomes one of the most devastating tests of civilian endurance in modern history. This siege matters because the city's survival became a symbol of resistance during the Eastern Front of World War II. The defenses are not only trenches and guns, they are factories, frozen streets, shelters, and a population refusing collapse. Supply trucks cross ice roads and dangerous routes, showing how logistics can become the thin line between life and disaster. Here, food, heat, medicine, transport, and winter become the true battlefield, pressing against every building. Inside the city, ordinary people carry water, work, wait, and endure, and the scene must never exploit their suffering. The outer blockade shows distant pressure, with the city isolated under snow and smoke rather than close combat. The winter of 1941 to 1944 was a turning point for Leningrad. The ice road across Lake Ladoga brought her. The Siege of Leningrad, September 1941 to January 1944, a harrowing winter where the city. Leningrad mattered because its survival carried military, political, and emotional weight far beyond the city limits. The siege was relentless, stretching for years, a brutal test of human endurance and the resilience of a city. What I remember is the snow, because it covers everything, except the fact that the city did not vanish. The final portal opens in a mountain valley, where colonial warfare meets artillery, trenches, and a turning point in decolonization. Chapter 10 brings me to Dien Bien Phu, where a fortified valley becomes a trap, and a colonial war reaches its breaking point. This siege matters because the Viet Minh victory effectively ends the First Indochina War and transforms decolonization politics. The defenses sit in the valley, but the surrounding hills become the decisive problem no fortress can ignore. Artillery, trenches, supply lines, and human labor move through mud and mountains, changing the logic of the battlefield. Supply pressure defines everything here because aircraft, roads, porters, ammunition, rain, and terrain decide what armies can actually do. Inside the valley, soldiers wait under constant pressure, while the camera keeps the scene strategic and non-graphic. The outer ring is made of trenches and hills, slowly tightening around positions that once seemed defensible. The turning point comes when the besiegers control the rhythm, the high ground, and the artillery pressure around the valley. In the heart of the Indochina jungle, the French fortress of Dien Bien Phu stands besieged. The Viet Minh, hidden in the surrounding mountains. Dien Bien Phu mattered because it signaled the end of French colonial rule in Indochina and inspired anti-colonial movements elsewhere. This story is not only about battlefield skill, it is also about politics, will, logistics, terrain, and a changing world order. What I remember is the valley itself, because the land that looked like a fortress became the center of the trap. The portals close after Dien Bien Phu, leaving one lesson. Every siege is a battle against time before it is a battle against walls. After 10 sieges, the pattern is clear. Walls matter, but time, supply, and decision usually matter more. A siege attacks more than stone. It attacks food, movement, morale, information, sleep, and the hope that rescue will arrive. That is why these stories must be told carefully, because every famous wall also casts a shadow over real human lives. If this journey continues, the next question is simple. Which last stands became legends because defeat itself changed history? I came looking for the greatest sieges in history, and I found the same truth everywhere. Time can be the strongest weapon.